This is unique because I went into saying I'm not looking to do an infomercial. I want someone to fund doing a free seminar in which I can guarantee that 90% of the material that I am presenting is something I would present at a normal seminar. And as you go through your presentations, you identify various design deficiencies relating to major projects. You identify control requirements as auditors that we'll talk about in the afternoon, in which we're looking for alternative solutions. And it just so happens that Action Software does provide some of those solutions that we'll be discussing, but all the material that will be discussed across both the AM and PM sessions would be used regardless of what solutions that you provide, but obviously you have to check out whether those other providers provide all the capabilities. And of course, if you're not a ZOS environment, most of these controls, especially in the AM session, extend beyond the actual platform you're on. You have to install it within all of the environments. So I think that'd be very beneficial, which is why we are triggering the AM session, definitely to make sure the IT managers are included in that, because the IT managers are the ones that are facing with these project initiatives that come forward through different parts of the business. And based on that, there's very few self-initiated IT projects that are tied out to large global projects the way we had from the Y2K days, the euro currency, actions we had to take in terms of Sarbanes-Oxley, new solutions that we get into in regards to credit card processing and the PCI. These are solutions that come from the business, that are driven by the business, in which IT is brought to the forefront to provide those solutions. So obviously the directive is May 25th, 2018, and is replacing the 1995 Data Protection Directive that was previously in place. Again, this directive, GDPR, does not require ratification from the EU countries, so it is in essence effect. And a lot of the countries are in the process of changing their own data privacy laws to further align with GDPR. The French came out with a bill that's going to assign the same legal data protection rights to a framework that aligns with GDPR. Belgium has already come out. I saw the latter part of 2016 with their guidance. The UK has brought about their own initiatives that they're planning on doing. Again, in my full-scale GDPR seminar, I get into a lot more detail, obviously, on the UK initiatives. This is just high-level background in terms of what we're confronted with. The previous act, obviously in 1995, was the origin for many of the GDPR requirements, but a lot more stringent, obviously, when brought about within GDPR. It took a lot of years to put this together, to get a consensus, to bring and raise the bar to the level where it is right now. So when I put things in parentheses, I'm actually quoting the actual standard, okay? So in this case, the control and process shall implement appropriate technical and organizational measures. We've used that terminology quite a bit in America with our GLBA. This is a complete restructuring of our design and modeling of how we understand data and process relationships. That is the bowels not only of Article 25, but of most of the articles within GDPR, which is the preliminary task that has to be done first in a project. If you don't have this mapping of data to processes, you can't do most of the articles. Again, feel free to ask any questions as you have as we go through this. Although we're not going to a lot of detail in some areas, I'd be happy to drop down a couple of levels. So what's the byproduct of controls that are necessary after the personal data collected is justified? And obviously the next thing is we have to keep it. There's a retention. We need to protect the data, and that's the underlying thing that we're looking to do, is to ensure we have the proper level of protection of data. The type of data that we're protecting is accessible through online access, through traditional GUI screens that we go through the workflow process of any business life cycle set of transactions. And then we have batch level access. Not only for support purposes are people getting access to batch level data, there's still batch level processes such as data interfaces where data from upstream systems must communicate with downstream systems. There's reporting processes. There's inter-system communication that occurs in which data is being delivered not on a real-time fashion, but in what we call in a mid-tier delivery process to other outside entities. That's all the batch level access. And when you deal with batch level access, it could be querying data from a database. It could be creating of extract files, which all have to be secured and protected. Again, the data modeling piece of understanding where all this data of consequence is will be identified. Once we identify it, we now have to protect it. And that's where we need our security systems to kick in. The batch level access is not just the data, but all the programs, which are the ones that are manipulating the data through triggered, predefined events, all have to be restricted. And again, a lot of us have traditional change control systems, which is ensuring source load, source executable integrity, and is migrating the programs through the various development, testing, and production phases. But all of the software components that manage data might not all be controlled by your automated change control systems, regardless if you're in a ZOS environment, if you're in a mid-tier environment, a distributed environment. Everything might not be controlled. That's one of the things you always do as an auditor is you want to understand what are all the software components that comprise a development environment and what change management processes are managing the change and migration of those components, and you do a reconcilement and you'll realize that some components are managed manually. And if they're managed manually, that means people need access to target and delivery directories and data sets where those programs will be stored, and I need to have additional layers of security to provide the control, audit trails, and possible restriction to those programs unless they're properly approved. And what systems am I using to provide that magic bullet of security, audit trails, and pre-approval and approval for protection of those components. So after you do that reconcile of all those components, at the break previously I talked about in a mainframe environment, very few environments I deal with, the JCL is controlled by your automated change control system, RTC, or if you control it through Endeavor, because there's so many changes that are occurring to the JCL, a lot of it's managed outside the process through your scheduling area, using TSO edit to edit the things. And how are you capturing all those changes? If you go through the change control systems, they provide a very messy audit trail of truly identifying what are the actual verbiage that's actually changed. It's very messy through CA7, through RTC, through Control M. It's very messy. So the member level audit trails, which are key to identify what changes are actually done, because just changing a step live and pointing it to my personal library, I can be running production from my personal library. So JCL is probably your most dangerous software component within a ZOS environment. You have the equivalent JCL in a Unix environment that you're dealing with. That has to be controlled, and I'm saying most of them are not controlled through an overall change control system, so we are looking for other solutions. We know that RACF will control things at a data set level, but I might have 1,000 modules or members within a partition data set. And we know RACF does not drop down to the module and member level to tell us what has been changed by who and what actual code was changed within that member or module. And that's where, in this case, Event Action provides some of the control capabilities we're looking for. Event Action on the pure ZOS old MVS side versus the Unix side of the USS Action does provide those additional control offerings. It provides that member level security of audit trails. We can identify not only the updates to the data sets, all aspects. So we have very sensitive members which might have passwords in there where we want to control the read access. All of this you will not get at the next layer, which is RACF, which is what you're giving, or if you're using top secret ACF2, they give you no member level visibility. So in the screenshot that I took event action, basically I am tracking certain data sets and high-low qualifiers using wildcards to have different variations. So this could be SIS1 or SIS2, obviously. And within each one of those, I'm tracking a certain amount of versions that I want to retain. And we know within SIS1, SysParmWipe has a very dangerous member called IASys00 or XX, which is the member that controls your entire configuration within ZOS. What's your member level audit trails? We know most people use SMP for installing releases of various system software products within a ZOS environment. But when you're making changes to an ISO0, you're not doing that through SMP. It's just straight editing that you're doing. And you're not doing it on a test set of volunteers doing it. You're doing it against the running system. So we need to have tight control of not only the ISO0 member, but a lot of the ParmWipe members that are out there on an individual basis. And with off-the-shelf RACF, you cannot have any of these audit trails. So not only you're not going to get an audit trail that changes, knowing that these changes should be very rare. We want a change request process to manage that. We want to make sure, although there are systems programmers have access to it, it's required for their job function. It's not necessarily required for them to change it at will without proper coordination. You want to make sure there's accountability for all changes. So I can actually set up where changes to that particular member requires a change request. That particular member goes even farther. It requires approval through an approval group to actually approve those changes. I can have a freeze period that says this change can only be done from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. this day or next week. So I can install your typical change windows that we all like to adhere to, because once you make that change, there's other things that are dependent upon that. Maybe it's tied to an IPL that you have to do, but either way, we need to coordinate the change. It must be approved, and it needs to be tracked. And these are the things that Event Action and USX Action will provide us that you cannot get off the shelf with RACF.
No, I have one question.
Sure.
Like, even if we are working in organization,
yep.
Like if I work for Citibank, okay, if I have to make any changes in JCL or in the COBOL program, then of course I have to follow a procedure, like RFC, request for change, and then there's a change management procedure. So in this way we can track our changes.
But the change management procedure you have, how preventive is it? Is it someone just following the orders, documenting the change, opening up a ServiceNow ticket, and saying, I'm making the change? But the tie-in of the dynamics of the actual change to the actual from the incident request system, where do you have that tie-in? And because in most cases, you open up an incident request ticket, and I could have made the changes 3 months ago or three months down the road. It also ties when you're going to make the change to it. So it's, the change window is so critical to tie that in. And am I getting the proper approvals before I make those changes?
Yeah, of course, but the environment where I work, there is a change window and there is a change approval committee, and everything is there, approval is there, there's a change window and schedule is there.
Now how is that change window enforced? Because I attend a lot of those change control meetings, and it's great. And let's separate system changes from application changes, because you know also with the JCL changes, they're a lot more frequent that you're doing as compared to SysPar members, which are very infrequent. And you can put on a higher bar of control because they're infrequent. But now we're getting into a category, what do I do for JCL changes, where I'm making potentially hundreds of changes a day. Depending on how you use JCL, I know in some environments I deal with, the users control the JCL because they're changing the certain characteristics of the control cards, which represents data input that's coming in. So they're making hundreds of JCL changes every day. That's why a lot of them can't go through a change control system. But at least by pushing them through event action, I'm going to have the complete audit trail of all of the changes that are being made. I can force them to at least document what's this change required to be done. And I can also say this change is going to be done during this period. That's the piece I think is missing from the release management that organizations have. They say that changes are done Thursday night for online and Friday morning for batch. How do you know they're doing it Thursday night and Friday morning? It's the guy, the honor system. I'm making the change. He has the routine access anyway. We're saying is that I can restrict him from making, although he has the routine access, he's not going to have that access unless it's during that period. I can make it that restrictive to make sure it's truly done during the change control window, where I think before you had no way to enforce the change control meeting's request to make that change in a particular period of time. And I think that's the added value as an auditor, is to ensure the wishes of the change control meeting of when it should be installed, there's a preventive control to enforce it. Other types of 404 controls that we're looking at that are required controls, again, authorization prior to making changes to all the in-scope components, so that's data, programs, whatever it may be, that comprise your in-scope SOX 404 environment. We want the audit trails of the actual changes for those in-scope components. Problems are with the job scheduling system. If you're editing jobs through them, they don't give you good audit trails of what actually has been changed. If you're changing it outside through TSO, we know we don't get member level audit trails. So again, the level of audit trails are going to be very limited. Again, we want to force the requirement to have a change request for certain components of 404 that are considered critically important. The jobs or the programs that generate the 10K, the financial statements, you want an extra way of control over those programs because they impact directly 404. So giving a Unix example, in Unix we use cron jobs. This is an example within cron jobs of under an OID, I'm putting certain jobs that are under the control of that, and I can set up whether it requires approval. In this case, approval is not required. Whether I can track when the change was actually made, so I can tie it to a change control window, and we also can set up approvals if we wanted to. So if jobs are so critical, so we take the financial statement jobs, and I know in a lot of organizations I audit, they have separate job scheduling directories. They store the financial statement jobs versus the rest, because the one that impacts the financial statements, they have to have an additional layer of security on. So again, you can use event action to put also that additional layer of security over the execution of those jobs and what targets they end up updating. And then obviously you want to have some level of audit trails, in this case of the changes to the cron job. So this case tells you what cron job was changed, by who, and what particular date. Again, having this module level audit trails. If you're doing it strictly at a USS action level, they're already giving you directory level changes. A change was made to this directory, but not of the actual objects within the directory, and that's where the audit trail falls short in ZOS, specifically in a Unix environment. You can draw the same parallel if you were controlling jobs within a straight ZOS environment. You have JCL libraries where things are stored. You have jobs within those JCL libraries. How are you managing who updates those particular members? You're not going to get those audit trails through native RACF security. And then eventually you want to have, when you talk about doing a member level security review, I remember the old days as an auditor, we always wanted all JCL changes and even source programs to go through source-to-source comparison to someone doing independent reviews. But someone just doing eyeball comparing two modules is very difficult to detect the changes. This is an example within, obviously, the data output utility within event action, in which I can actually see that a specific line, in this case a proc lib, was actually added to the particular member on this side of the compare. So again, tracks all the changes, gives a nice simple interface to actually see the changes that were being made. So the key requirements that we deal with in terms of PCI that might be of interest in relation to authorization and change management is the whole aspect surrounding audit trails. Again, 10.1, we're supposed to be implementing audit trails that links all of the system components to each individual. So it's really a data mapping of the recreation of what I've done within a particular system. I must have audit trail that ties all the actions of an individual. 10.2, we need to implement audit trails for various system components to reconstruct events such as who accesses the cardholder data, which is critical. So if he's accessing a flat file, we need to have an inventory of where all the unstructured data is of the credit card data and have an audit trail to identify every time it's being accessed, not just for an update, but any read level access needs to be identified. Again, any privileged access that was done by privileged IDs, we need a focused audit trail of those particular IDs as part of 10.2.2. Integrity of the audit trails is key. It's great that we're collecting all of these audit trails, but if someone can actually stop the logging of the audit trail or actually change events on the audit trail record file, that's of consequence. A lot of them are within unstructured data files that we can actually secure at a greater level that goes beyond RACF security or regular Windows security. Any stopping, pausing of the audit trails, again, that's the integrity of the audit trail. And any deletion of overall system level objects also have to be included in the audit trail. Again, do we have products in place that can provide that? So again, with an event action, all of these various audit trail components that we talked about, specifically what we're talking about in terms of deletion of system objects, and also access to the audit trail files themselves, that all can be controlled under event action and USS action to make sure the integrity of the data is preserved. We can identify the location of the cardholder data and again put that under USS or event action to provide that additional security layer that's tied to a reference. So we can reference this as one identifier that's protecting all of these elements. And that's important versus a one-off protection which is not tied to any structure. It's important to have that inventory dictionary tie-in of what we are protecting. On 10.5, we're required to have secure audit trails that cannot be altered. Obviously, we need some additional security over those audit trail files. There's privileged users that have access to those files. So if you're dealing with a Unix environment, you have your Oracle DBAs that are basically doing activity, which are being logged in the Oracle logs. Well, if you have privileged root level access, you can now update those audit trails. So if your DBAs in many shops are still required to have root level access because they share some responsibilities, how are you going to ensure those audit trails are not being impacted? Because they can impact at the root level. Well, you need that additional security layer over those audit trail files to detect when they're actually updating specific records or actually deleting the file. And again, there should be no reason why they should be touching it, but by having root level access, they do have access to those files. What is the security layer and security blanket that you're putting in place? In this case, we're saying that event action, USX action, would provide that additional security layer over those audit trail files. 7.1, in terms of PCI, we want to limit access to system components and the cardholder data to only those individuals that's required for their particular job function. And even though it's required for their job function, we still want to have accountability for all the actions that they are performing. So again, one of the control requirements that we are looking for is some level of member level security that's in place, and we know we don't get that in a RACF level or at a USS Action Directory level. So we need to have some additional control levels to limit those member module level accesses, which of course both the read and the update access can be managed and controlled by event action through its security layer.